Now, South Africa remains divided over the EFF's existence, or rather insistence to invite the Kenyan scholar, Professor Patrick Lumumba, for its 10th anniversary celebrations next month. It also follows Professor Lumumba's recent praise for the anti-LGBTIQ+ law in Uganda and his disparaging remarks on the LGBTQI+ community. For more on the story, I'm joined in studio by Thokozani Mbwana, who's a human rights researcher and poet at Campaign for Free Expression. Good to have you on the program this afternoon, Thokozani. Now, with the EFF and the UCT moving forward with their plans to host Professor Lumumba, despite these homophobic views that he's quite openly expressed, what do you think is the potential impact of still allowing him this platform?
So I guess this is the thing, right? It's a dilemma in which they've created where they could potentially be platforming bigotry, hate speech, disinformation, and that could cause a lot of problems internally, externally, with students who have the right to protest, staff who have the right to protest, people who have the right to oppose his views, but also it creates a situation where it puts UCT and the EFF in a position where we're not quite sure what their views are now on situations like LGBTIQ+ rights, because they are platforming bigotry, right? And allowing for him to have that platform it's a contentious situation, because he has the right to freedom of expression. He can express views. However, those views cannot be hate speech. They cannot be disinformation. They cannot be misinformation. They cannot be harmful to others. You know, he can say, I hate LGBTIQ+ individuals. Right. That's his personal belief. But allowing him the platform to go further, where he perpetrates hate speech or disinformation, could cause a lot of issues for UCT, for its staff, for the students, LGBTIQ+ community on the campus, and supporters of the EFF who, you know, after just recently the EFF has been marching for the Ugandan LGBTIQ+ community, and it sends a very confusing message, which is worrying.
You say it raised a very confusing message, and you also highlight the fact that the EFF itself has in recent times protested against this law in Uganda. Let's speak about the calls being raised right now for the EFF to heed to this growing pressure that Professor Lumumba should not be allowed this platform.
Yes, I think it's an interesting dynamic, right? Because who the EFF associates with definitely has implications on how they're viewed. And that's the issue at stake, because you are pushing a manifesto that has a lot of people behind you and a lot of vulnerable, marginalized people behind you. And then you come out and platform someone who has openly said, I am a homophobe, who has openly said, you know, LGBTIQ+ individuals are sick and need to be cured. That message then is worrying for the people who support the EFF and who are expecting, you know, change, expecting protection, and supporting this political party. And so it's difficult, and I think it's one of those things where it will be an interesting case to look at, right? At how the EFF chooses to go ahead with this plan, because they said we're platforming him to change his mind, you know, and is that the right decision? We're not sure about that, because again it puts him in a position where he can openly perpetuate hate speech and disinformation, and that is a problem for the EFF and UCT.
I want us to again zoom into the role of UCT here. I mean, higher learning institutions are also known as a hotbed for diverse opinions. It would seem that UCT also now has this careful balancing act to play. What would you say in response to this?
No, absolutely. And this is the thing. The point of academic institutions are to cultivate environments of diverse opinions. You can't have ideas, you can't have enrichment without diverse opinions. However, they also have the duty and the obligation to protect against discrimination and to protect against hate speech and to protect against disinformation. And so they are now positioned in a place where giving Lumumba this platform, to what extent will they challenge him if he becomes out of line? To what extent will they allow the students and the staff the freedom to engage with him, protest against him? To what extent will they be able to contain the situation should this lecture go ahead and things devolve? Because we don't know what the consequences are of giving him this platform and him being confronted with people who are going to challenge him. And so that's going to be a very delicate balancing act, as you said, for UCT, and I think that we'll only know when the time comes, you know.
On the part of the EFF, many may argue that the party itself has every right to decide who it associates with, even constitutionally as well. How do you respond then to that particular argument?
I think that is the case. They are absolutely allowed to engage with whomever they want, but with every action there is a consequence, right? And that's what we're talking about, is the consequence of this action. This choosing to engage with a renowned bigot is going to have consequences for their constituency, and that's something, unfortunately, they're going to have to then deal with, right? And the implications of the backlash and the implications of, you know, their marginalized communities feeling unsafe potentially to support them. And so they're absolutely within their right.
I want us to shift gears a bit. I mean, the campaign for the free expression also emphasizes this importance, if you will, of allowing free speech on campus while not exactly tolerating hate speech, discrimination, as well as disinformation. Now, in your view, what strategies can academic institutions implement to strike this balance between these two principles very effectively as well?
I think one of the key things is to engage with the communities that could potentially be affected by situations like this, right? So this is a great example of, you know, everybody finding out all at once that this lecture was happening, but I think having conversations with communities that could be affected is a really good starting point in understanding where lines need to be drawn in terms of what we allow to be free speech or what we let when we let free speech happen, and how we need to mitigate the risks around disinformation, discrimination, etc. Prof. Lumumba could go and do a lecture on decolonial theory, you know, and we can't say anything about it. He's not talking about LGBTIQ+, you know, issues. And that could have been a different negotiation, right? But the fact that there was no negotiation around how the communities could be affected and how they can engage in this topic safely, and what are their needs and worries around bringing this person into this alleged safe space. You know, how do we navigate that? And I think these are the types of questions as institutions they need to start asking is, you know, if we are going to be platforming certain problematic people, how do we do that safely by allowing this person to have their freedom to express, but also ensuring that the community can protest, but the community is also safe, and the community can engage with this person and challenge this person in a situation where no real harm comes out of it. And I think that's the...
I want to continue with that theme and also focus on strategy beyond the case of Professor Lumumba. Are there any existing guidelines or even these, call it best practices, that academic institutions or even political parties can adopt to really better navigate these complexities of platforming individuals with controversial views? And if not, what steps can be taken to even develop such guidelines?
Yeah, I think we can definitely talk about the development of such guidelines, and I guess this comes from a case-by-case situation, right? It depends on the institution, the demographics of the students and the people there, or the demographics of the political party and their constituencies. But again, this thing of community engagement comes up a lot, right? You won't know what you are fighting for if you don't engage with your community. And I think in these instances, conversations around, institutions bringing students on board, bringing staff on board and saying, if we were to platform, certain problematic people, how would this affect the community? How can we do this in a way that, ensures safety of all groups involved, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the steps that can start being taken, but it's very hard to say best practices because it really is dependent on case-by-case, institution, party, and as well as what the content of, the issue is. And so that's a lot of work that needs to be done, is involving the people who might be affected by platforming certain people.
But it then also begs the question as to, are there any existing guidelines or even best practices that institutions of higher learning or even political parties can implement? Or if not, what kind of steps can be taken to indeed develop these guidelines?
So I think that the steps taken need to be understanding what the ethos of the institution is and directing energy into strategies around how you can engage certain people. Not necessarily to deplatform people, but I think if you are looking for a certain type of perspective, you need to also know the people you're reaching out to and 100%. The people you are speaking to, right? You need to vet who you are bringing into your space. And I think that's a very easy, beginning point, right? And again, I'll come back to the EFF as an example, but, the EFF had mentioned that they hadn't had known Lumumba had these views until he came out and said it, and they're going forward with it, right? And I guess that was that point where they chose to go forward, where a conversation could have happened, where they said, okay, we have platformed this person, and this is what we are planning to do, and these were what we were going to carry on with. How do we move forward from here, with their community, their constituencies, and getting input from that. And if they decide to move forward and say, you know what, actually we will give them the platform regardless, then, they've done the work to get to that decision. And again, because they have the right to make that decision, they can make it. But then people also have the right to respond to it. And I think that's what makes it such a complex situation, is that everybody within these spaces all have rights to respond to all of each other's interactions, and that's what poses the complication for the EFF and UCT to then make sure that all of that happens coherently and safely.
I want to focus on your last aspect as we wrap up our conversation. You say that people have the right to respond to these differing views, if you will. Let's speak about the role of students themselves, or even activists, to raise more consciousness around these kind of issues here.
Yeah, no, there's been, I think, brilliant work. There is brilliant work being done and continues to be done by students, activists, student activists, and it's crucial work, because I think it, especially with the student population, it keeps them informed, it keeps them engaged, and it keeps them on top of really important topics that affect their lives and their peers' lives, right? And this was a really great example, if you had seen on Twitter the uproar that had happened and the backlash and the conversations that were happening, because a lot of people also didn't know about what was going on in Uganda, and that's how we're becoming informed about, this anti-LGBTIQ+ law in Uganda. And so the access to information in instances like that bursts up and that happens, is really great when you see activists and students engaging in the dialogue and the discourse, because it's important. It's things we need to know. And the more we're informed, the more we can make decisions. You can choose now whether or not you go to that lecture by the EFF and Professor Lumumba. You know, you can choose if you want to go. You'll be prepared to say what you want to say. You know, so it allows people to be informed, to engage actively in political and social life, and that's what's great about the work that students and activists are doing.
Thokozani, let me thank you for your time. That's human rights researcher Thokozani Mbwana speaking to us, of course, about the EFF as well as UCT hosting Professor Lumumba to give his insights despite his controversial remarks about the LGBTI+ community. Coming